I met a gypsy.
So Ryan Walkinshaw joins us on the podcast. My management, Sam Moore, has once again come through with the goods. And I know you don't have the full 3 hours that we normally do for Gypsy Tales. So I just figured I'd ask, in your downtime when you're not thinking about the multiple businesses that you run and all the shit that I'm sure you do from day to day, where does your mind wander off to? What's on your mind these days, Ryan?
What's on my mind these days? That's a pretty weird question to ask someone in 2020, isn't it?
Yeah, I figure there's some different stuff going on, you know what I mean?
I mean, to be honest, when I'm not at work, I spend most of my time trying to hang out with friends and my partner Haley, because I travel so much with work. Obviously not this year, because this year I've not been able to travel, so I've kind of been stuck in Australia, but genuinely I travel a lot, so I try and spend most of my free time trying to catch up with people who I haven't seen in a long period of time. You know, I don't get to see my friends back in Europe very often, and when I'm in Australia, I'm normally catching up with friends from Australia who I've not seen while I've been in Europe. So you know, I guess my mind sort of wanders to you know, who I can hang out with, and you know, going out for dinners and things like that. But if you're talking more like introspectively, what my mind wanders to, I don't know, some pretty weird shit sometimes.
It's the stuff I like.
Just trying to think what might be under R-rated.
No, this show is R-rated too.
I know. I've seen a few episodes. I've seen Sammy going full sledge. It's terrifying. Yeah, I guess just normal sort of stuff, really.
Has this year thrown anything weird at you that you've like spent time thinking about that you've never really thought about before this?
Well, yeah, quite a lot of stuff, because obviously it's been such a crazy year, and particularly for someone who runs a couple of businesses,
and internationally too.
Yeah. It's you end up thinking a lot about sort of strategizing what you're going to do going forward, because especially with so many uncertainties, you know, there's been a fair bit of reflection internally in the business and with the people in the business and so on as well. So that always comes into play quite a lot in my mind, because especially when you have a situation like this year where there's only a certain amount of things that are actually under your control, and where fewer of those things that are normally under your control are not actually under your control anymore, because there's different variables coming in, like, you know, governments suddenly forcing you to shut down one of your businesses with 2 days notice, and you know, or trying to manage staff remotely, especially when you're a manufacturing business, that can be quite challenging. On the race team side of things, you know, trying to be involved with the race team that's been on the road for, you know, 100 or so days away from their friends and family. So kind of thinking about how you strategize that and how you try and keep your eyes forward, because what you can get caught up in is when lots of things are going on around you and you feel a bit not helpless, that's the wrong word, but a little bit disjointed, because things are happening which are outside of your the norm, so to speak. You know, it's really easy to just start, you know, thinking about tomorrow or next week, whereas, you know, most successful business owners, I think, would tell you that they're, you know, always looking out months in advance, years in advance. But something like COVID comes in and it just smashes that straight out of the park. So, you know, it really forces you to reevaluate those things. So I think I spent a lot of time, you know, trying to just navigate some of the short-term things without missing the long-term goals and objectives. And one thing we looked at when COVID occurred, and obviously, you know, we took it pretty seriously right from the bat, and you know, we started cost saving immediately. We became pretty frugal in our spending, because at the time, in February, March, we didn't know if this was going to be a 2-month issue or a 2-year issue. It looks more like it's going to be a 2-year issue. So we just went, you know, hell for leather on full conservation mode, which has benefited us now. But going through that process is you know, by its very nature, forces you to reevaluate what you're doing, because, you know, forces you into a position where you need to make tough calls, forces you in a position where you need to, you know, look at personnel you have working for you, you know, who is potentially expendable, who can the business survive without, and so on, if you're getting into desperate times, because at the end of the day, you know, the survival of the business is pretty much paramount, right? Yeah. And you know, you're much, as bad as it sounds, you're much better off having a couple of people be removed from the business so that the other 200 people can still have a job going forward, as opposed to keeping a couple of people on the payroll but putting everyone's jobs at risk. So going through a lot of that took a lot of mental capacity out of my sort of daily thinking. Just because all those tough decisions are pretty hard, especially when you've got human beings and emotions and all that sort of stuff. That all adds a different emotional value on top of just the sort of intellectual, psychological value that would genuinely have when you're having these sort of thoughts. Yeah,
because I mean they're like essentially, when you hear people, they'll be like, oh, they're not just a number, but like on a spreadsheet they are just a number. But then when you add in the personal relationships that you've got, and there's all of the this extra stuff that sort of comes into play that you can't just rely on like the spreadsheet data, because then it just becomes so ruthless. Like there is personalities involved.
Yeah, there is, and you look at some of the big, large corporates. I mean, a lot of the time there, because they've got such large businesses and they are heavily corporatized, and in those situations, it's quite hard not to look at people. At least the majority of people as a number on a spreadsheet. But my business, we're a family business. We've got 600 employees now, but we still see ourselves as a family business, and we still know most of the people who work for us, and particularly our key executive team, who work with the whole time. There's no such thing as just a 9-to-5 job anymore. We're on the phone with these people every evening. We're weekends, we're spending time together and things like that. So it's there is an emotional value and at the end of the day an emotional cost to going through these sort of decisions as well, which just makes everything always a little bit more difficult. But I'm sure I'm not alone in that kind of challenge this year. I'm sure that's a challenge that will resonate with any small to medium sized business that we've gone through the same sort of turmoil, I'm sure. Yeah,
it's crazy this year too. Just the way, like if you just said this time 12 months ago, I mean, we were in New Zealand, like Sammy and I were in New Zealand riding together, and there was we just had unlimited freedom. That's not the case now. And for the world to be so drastically different in 12 months, like I couldn't have predicted that. And if someone come and said to me 12 months ago, and it even explained the situation, you'd probably still be like, nah, but surely you'd be able to do this, this and this. And for the way that things have just come to like a grinding halt in 2020, like it's pretty incredible what I guess has been taken away and how quickly it could get taken away.
Yeah, and because there's two sides of that, right? There's how it's impacted businesses and how businesses have had to adapt to a pretty rapidly changing environment, and it's not just adapting once; it's been multiple tiers of adaptation as things have progressed. That we've understood more and more about the risk of the virus, the impact on how it's going to have on the economy and on people, and travel, and on a whole bunch of different areas. But then there's the personal toll, right? Because we're not used to it. And whilst this is something I always tell a lot of people when I have these sort of discussions, when people say like, oh, all our freedoms have been removed and this is unprecedented. It's actually not. These sort of things used to happen quite regularly. Not to the same sort of degree, because we weren't a global customer as a planet as we are now, but locally and microcosms of environments and communities and so on, these sort of measures were relatively regular with a whole bunch of different viral outbreaks, like tuberculosis is a prime example. And that would shut off entire towns and villages, and they would genuinely go through quarantine, all these sort of things. So I think this time it's the scale which has really surprised people, and the fact that thanks to things like vaccines and infectious disease prevention and modern healthcare and so on, we haven't really had a big viral outbreak that's actually not being contained. The last one that was a really severe one was probably Ebola, but that got contained pretty well because of the measures in restricting.
What was the one that was in Brazil around the Olympics?
Zika virus?
It's Zika. I was living in the US at that time, and that had initially a very similar feeling to COVID. There was so much like kind of at the start speculation, and it just never really ramped up, whereas we had so much speculation, and then it just felt like 0 to 100.
And we had that with MERS as well, and there was another Asian one which I've forgotten the name of off the top of my head. There was SARS, and this is actually a SARS based coronavirus.
It's
anyway,
a similar type of thing.
It's SARS-CoV-2 is the actual name of the virus. The illness that it creates is COVID. And I think it's just because we've not had any of these big outbreaks for such a long period of time because of all the advancements in medical technology and treatments and so on, that I think it's just quite a big shock to everyone. And obviously whenever there's a shock, people try and come up with the path of least resistance to try and come up with an answer. And generally those answers are actually the wrong ones because things are generally more complicated than, what they initially appear to be. But from a business perspective, we've managed to navigate a lot of it relatively well. There's still a lot more to go, and I'm sure this isn't the end of it, and there'll be more challenges ahead of us. But there's I think the support from the Australian government in particular has been really, really good for the most part for businesses, and for the people that work for them as well. So it does kind of show that even when you have a really cataclysmic potential event like we've had with this pandemic, that when we all sort of work together and when governments are genuinely supportive of their people, you can weather the storm and with a decent recovery plan, have a relatively low amount of direct damage right now. Even though we're going to be paying for this damage for a long period of time, it's manageable, it's not catastrophic, which I think has been pretty good so far.
And so the fact that you've got businesses in multiple countries, like you're not just running a business in Australia, what's been the biggest challenge there? Just the fact that you haven't been able to travel?
There's a bit of that, but I mean, one of the ironic things is that because everyone's been working remotely at home, everyone's been doing Zoom calls and Microsoft Team calls anyway. So actually, what I end up doing with international work when I'm in Australia has just sort of continued as normal because there's no other way that I'll be able to do it, even if I was there for the most part, particularly in some states in the US. So, and actually transferred over to, the opposite, where in Australia, I've been forced to do the same sort of treatment that, would end up giving to anything that I would be doing internationally whilst I was here because, everyone's been sat at home, everyone's working remotely, everyone who can work remotely is working remotely. And so, you just end up using the same platform for everything, which is Zoom calls. So same as everyone else has this year. So it's not been that difficult to manage in that respect, primarily because the situation is just sort of consolidated into the same kind of behavior that we've all had to become accustomed to this year.
Yeah, has it changed your perspective on the way that you worked before? Like, do you think that the way, like, pre-COVID was the most efficient way to work, or was it essentially like momentum? Because I mean, for me, like, I know I've spent the last 12 years just traveling, and you get so accustomed to this life on the road, and you're living out of suitcases, and an international flight to people like us that have done so many, it's not a big deal. And you talk to the average person on the street, if they do one international flight a year, it's a big deal. They're spending 2 weeks getting their stuff ready. So, when you're very regularly traveling, you get so accustomed to it. But now that I've been forced to stop, I'm like, man, this whole traveling thing really does suck up a lot of time and impacts your routine so heavily that now I've seen it as quite counterproductive. Obviously, there's stuff that you do need to travel for, but in retrospect, were you doing things the most efficient way?
No, absolutely not. And I think if anything that's good that's come out of this is the fact that you realize how fat, lazy and heavy not only the business was, but probably I was too. But it's without doubt that this has shown, it's forced companies to go and take drastic measures, and at least I can only speak on my behalf, but we've actually realized that with a lot less people doing, not even working all the time in the office, we've actually become more efficient, and we've actually had some really, really good financial results out of it all. We're selling a lot of cars. We've had, in our caravan business, we've had the best retail months that we've ever had on record since July, one month after another. So that's been really positive. And we spent this time sort of reconsolidating and re-strategizing what we want to do as a business and where we want to go, and doing more negotiations with new automotive customers and so on. And we just launched our new partnership with Volkswagen as an example, and the new one with GMSV, which is the transition over from Holden. And so in that respect, it's been really, really good. But, and I remember a year ago when I was trying to tell my CEO that I wanted to try and remove $2 or $3 million off of the overhead for the business. It was no fucking way. You never do that. No, this business will implode. There's no way we can do it. We're already running lean. There's no way we're going to be able to, take any more overhead out. And now, we've done that and more this year, and actually the business is running better. So that's been a really good example of inefficiency. And it's sometimes you need a bit of kick in the arse to change behavior. And this has been one that's just been forced upon me and everyone else in the whole world pretty much. So, and I guess it's how you react to that, which is really important. But the second part of your question on the travel, I really enjoy travel. I also quite like it because when you're on a plane, you end up being able to actually switch off, and that used to be better before they ended up putting Wi-Fi on all the big international flights. Now, you're 3 hours into a flight and you're like, oh, just check my phone, and then, oh fuck, this email's come through, I'm going to go and do that. Then you look another one, then you look another one, then you're on WhatsApp, then you're on, wasting time with a whole bunch of other stuff on your phone, which actually has got almost zero value when you actually think about it. And so that kind of has been changing over the last few years anyway, to make me what I used to enjoy flying, because I used to read books on science and things like that, to actually end up doing the same crap you do when you're sat on your sofa and just strolling through Instagram and things.
Just getting the scroll hole but 30,000 feet. It's
so stupid. But you're right when you say that. I used to go and sometimes fly to the US for one meeting. So you think about the time that it takes to go to the airport, get on a flight for 14, 16 hours to LA, then get on another flight to Detroit for another bunch of hours, and then get off, get to your hotel, get changed, go and have a 2-3 hour meeting.
Tired ass meeting.
Yeah, exactly. And a meeting when you're actually doing a bit of a shit job because you're tired, you're jet lagged. If you've been in business, you're probably a little bit hungover. And it's actually a really crap, inefficient use of your time.
Yeah.
And I think one benefit out of this for businesses is that the amount of money we used to spend on air travel every single year to go and have these sort of meetings was enormous. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, where we've actually managed to do just as good a job without anyone leaving the country for the last year. So it shows it can be done, and it can be done really efficiently and effectively. And to be honest, I think you actually spoke to some of our engineers who do these trips even more regularly than I do, often to the US to go and see some of our partners like GM and so on over there. They actually probably get a better job done now because there's you don't have the opportunity to just go and fly, so you've got to do the extra work here to ensure that it happens. And I think you get the same kind of respect and approach from the other side as well. Whereas sometimes the other side of the business equation, they'll be sitting there saying, oh, these guys could just come and fly over and come see us and we can just nut this out. Whereas when you can't do that, it's like, oh shit, we're actually going to have to sit down and nut it out over a Zoom call. And then everyone actually realizes it's exactly the same. So I think that'll actually be a benefit for a lot of businesses going forward if they approach it the right way. Yeah,
it's funny, like on the one aspect, like I said before, we've essentially, and when I say like we've lost a lot of freedom, I don't mean that in like an anti-government, anti-regulation sort of way, but in terms of just like what I can actually do right now. Can I book a flight? No, I'm not free to do that. So there is a lot of just things that we took for granted that we can't do anymore. But you look now, like, to talk about the caravan business. There's so many people. Like, we went to the Whitsundays. The Whitsundays is now exploding. Cairns has had terrible years of tourism. Like, that's where we grew up, and that's a town that is completely built on tourism, and that's had a resurgence. So it seems like in such a short period of time, like, so much has been taken away, but then so much has then just been regenerated, I guess, because people still have these same urges to travel. People still have the same desires to go on holidays, and there's still these, I guess, the same base level pull that people have to go and do whatever it is. But now it's just like everyone's just figured like a little skirt around to do it,
Yeah, I mean, if people want to do something, you're not going to stop them from doing it. It's that goes from circumventing things for COVID and trying to find different solutions to restrictions and things like that. So but at the same time, whenever there's crisis, there's also opportunity, right? And the companies that and the people that look to try and find opportunity in all this chaos, they'll end up being the ones that come out of it a lot stronger than a lot of other people. And tourism in Australia naturally seems to like it's going to explode. I'm already at the front end of that, seeing that with our caravan sales, and our order book is pretty much full now until May, which is the best order book strength that we've had in probably ever. And that's not just us, that's a lot of our competitors as well, but that's a demonstration. It's a little litmus test on how you can see the appetite for the Australian consumer in that industry, and it's really, really strong. And if international travel does continue to be restricted over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, even if that's restrictions just based on vaccines, and vaccine rollouts are going to take at least a year anyway. So even with vaccines coming in, it doesn't instantly mean everyone's suddenly going to be able to travel, even if they have a vaccine, because just getting them is going to be difficult. And so Australia's in this weird little sort of bubble because it's a giant island in the middle of an ocean, so it has the opportunity to be able to internally manage itself really, really well. And there's some industries that naturally are going to explode because consumers, they can't go to Bali anymore, they can't go to New Zealand necessarily at the moment, they can't go to the US on their holidays, or Thailand, or Japan, or whatever it is. They're going to be much more restricted, and they're going to want to go and take opportunity in their own country. Now that's actually a great opportunity for trying to keep the economy for tourism and travel in Australia and pull it away from their competitors. And so you've got all these people that they're still going to want to go on holiday. People are still working.
That money
that money stays
going
here
to get spent in a different economy, essentially.
It's now going to stay here, and that's huge. And that's huge for all the hotels, for all the pubs, restaurants, shops, all these little rural villages and towns, and see coastal towns and all that sort of thing. They're going to see a real boom that they've probably not had for decades and decades, at least since cheap international travel was something that was readily available to most people. So again, you've had this catastrophic, horrible year, but you might see 5 years of some of the best tourism economy that Australia's had in decades. So for those who want to try and grasp it and are in the right place at the right time, there's really, really good opportunity. It just requires people to go and take it.
Yeah, and so with the just international travel, or just plain like aviation in general, to me, in my head, I struggle to think that these kind of travel bans could last just purely for the fact that, I guess, underlying the tourism side of aviation, there's just a global trade kind of aspect to it that seems like, I don't know, in my head I'm thinking like, the longer this doesn't, we're not allowed to fly, what's the backstage impact on, I guess, like the more base level of that industry? Because you got to think that if planes aren't flying, that's going to affect like Boeing's parts, like parts production and servicing, and any engine that just doesn't get run, you've got rubber seals that are going to start to dry out. That it just seems like if it doesn't get back going, just there's some real fundamental things that will, I guess, require an industry to keep going. And if they're not happening, it sort of seems like there's going to be all these little undercover things that might be what actually fucks that industry, not just the fact that there's no tourism, Yeah,
it's an interesting point. I mean, there's an argument for saying the airline industry was pretty bloated anyway. I mean, did we really need to have the 100 or so airlines that currently exist around the world? Probably not. Could we do it with more efficiently with 10 or 15? You probably could. And so it doesn't really seem like it's had the same kind of consolidation as a lot of other industries have had. So maybe
there's just planes that are just in Alice Springs, right? Because they didn't want to keep any of them by the coast because of the salt. So there's just like hundreds of these planes there, and it's just like, what? How does this work? Like, this seems like a huge problem. And there's so much that is reliant on planes moving in the air that's just goes far beyond just general tourism.
Yeah, no, there is, absolutely. But I mean, it doesn't seem like it's impacted global trade too much. I mean, most global trade happens on ships anyway, so it doesn't seem to be doing too much interference on there. And from what I understand, a lot of the haulage planes for air freight are still operating regularly. I mean, we've had parts and stuff from the US for a lot of our engineering, engineering development work. Unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, sometimes things get slowed down, and having to air freight instead of ship in order to meet your deadlines. And we haven't had too many issues with that. the tourism and the actual retail side of it is obviously something which is dramatically different. And again, I guess the principles of economics are always going to play into it, right? There's going to be a supply and demand. There's going to be a reset to some degree on how airlines operate. You're probably not going to have a lot of these planes that are half full flying around just for the sake of it, because it's easier just to lose a little bit of money on that flight than to to sweat the asset that you have than to lose it. And as I said previously, some airlines will go bust, but at the same time, it's
we might not have needed all of those.
You probably didn't need them anyway. If anything, it's probably detracting away. You'd rather have 20 businesses that are doing really, really well, looking after their customers really well, and doing a good job, and ensuring that they're profitable enough to be able to do all the right safety standards, buy new planes all the time, and so on, as opposed to having 20 airlines that are doing okay but just sort of scraping by, and then another sort of 30 airlines that are breaking even or losing a bit, and then a whole bunch of others which are losing a shitload. And at the end of the day, that's all customer risk. I mean, how many times do airlines go bust when the economy is doing well? Yeah, quite often. Yeah. So when the economy is doing bad, or there's something like a pandemic, that's surely gonna mount that tenfold probably. But I don't see that necessarily a bad thing, because at the end of the day, the good airlines will be the ones that survive, and that's going to be a benefit to the customers at the end of the day, because there's a lot of airlines out there which are pretty shit and shouldn't really be in business, and are only
go to Asia to figure that out.
And they're all losing loads of money, or they're being subsidized through a whole bunch of nonsense, or they're constantly getting bought out by this guy, then bought out by this hedge fund, and then bought out by this other airline, and flipped the whole time to different businesses. But every time that happens, just weakens the business even more. And it's it's probably good that the airline industry, to a certain degree, is going to have a bit of a reset. And I think the consumers will be the ones who are better off on the back end of it. But at the end of the day, that's based on today. If this goes on for another 2 years, then I'm not sure how many airlines can survive that unless they're going to be heavily subsidized by government. It just doesn't make sense. No one's going to be able to survive that.
It's just interesting to think about that. The things that probably would bring it to its knees aren't just the people flying. It's just it's probably all these little things that you just can't be overcome once it gets down the road X amount of time. It's just that's one industry, but you sort of have a good point, I guess, in that I guess it always looks bleak from kind of where you're standing right now. But if you look at like the taxi industry, that got completely revolutionized with Uber. And I'm sure that when you're standing at some point standing there, you're thinking this is just going to fuck everything. Yeah. And then now we're like, well, no, the consumer wins here. Like the innovation was forced upon this industry. Yep. And I would say that the people that obviously Uber shareholders benefit quite drastically, but that's because they provided a great service to the customer, and the market decided.
Yeah, exactly, and that's how it should be, right? Because at the end of the day, if the market decides, generally you've got the economic trends which will push it in a certain direction, but the consumer at the end of the day is the one that ends up having the ultimate decision. I'll give you a good story on this. So back turn of the century in New York, when the automobile started, and there was this huge hoo-ha because there was a big union at the time that were essentially focused around looking after workers whose jobs it was to clean horse shit off the roads. Yeah. And they tried for years to get New York, the city of New York, to ban this automobile, because they were like, well, you're going to lose hundreds or thousands of jobs from all these guys, and all the different stables looking after all the horses that everyone had. What are they going to do? This is going to devastate the economy. Only a few people are going to be able to survive it. It's going to cripple. It's going to be workers now on the streets, jobless, and all that sort of thing. It turned out to be bullshit, right? Because actually being able to have cars has actually blown up the economy and actually been a benefit for it, and given far more opportunity for people to do things that they actually want to do, because in general people don't really like cleaning up horse shit. They'd much prefer to have a different job, but in lieu of not having a different job, that's the job that they have. But if you remove that job, it forces them into different avenues. And the same argument can be, to a certain degree, not 100%, but to a certain degree, pushed towards people who are really scared about automation and roboticization and so on in business. The big thing is how we're going to be able to support jobs going forward. And at the end of the day, there is probably a tipping point. If every single job is pretty much done by robots or algorithms, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have an issue with the over-expanding population and growing population and not enough jobs potentially. But so far, we pretty much managed to find new jobs for people, because whenever those jobs people don't really want, like, like working on a presser, for example,
100%.
people don't really want to do that job. It's shit paid.
100%.
It's dirty. It's loud. It's dangerous. People actually, having a robot do that, it makes a lot more fucking sense anyway.
Have you thought about this a lot? This whole impending sort of automation and I guess like artificial intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's.
I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, because it's something I've thought about a little bit, and obviously I don't really have any skin in the game in manufacturing and business, so I'm sure you're gonna have much better perspectives on it than me.
I mean, I read it a long time ago. There's a really good book on this called The Future by Al Gore, and he actually talks. There's a whole chapter on roboticization and on automation, and he explains some of these things that there is going to be a massive shift going forward as people try and as businesses try and manufacture things cheaper and cheaper. And the human element is always an element of risk, because humans make mistakes. Robots don't make mistakes. Algorithms don't really make mistakes unless a human computed the wrong program into the algorithm. That's the mistake, the human element. So naturally, people are going to see a massive transition. It's already happening. It's already happened in a lot of industries already, but that'll continue to grow. But again, like we were talking to, the end result is a cheaper product, which the people want. You can have businesses which will have people building iPhones, but your iPhone will be $4,000 instead of $1,000, and the consumer doesn't want that. So you see all these people arguing about all these different issues, but the bottom line is you can have it the other way, but it comes at a cost. Like my cars, for example, that we sell. We do our conversions and we do our performance enhancements. And most of it's done by hand. We can't really automate too much or use robotics too much because of the complexity in our builds, and because of the inability for robot programs to be able to adapt, pretty dramatically from product to product, and the cost of implementation and so on. So it's still a lot of it's done by hand, and so the end product is always going to be a lot more expensive than a product which is done on a production line using robots. But at the same time, if you want to have that product, the only way we can do it is by that. If you want to have the product which is all done by robots and cheaper and so on, you have that option with what the automotive companies do. You buy a
base model Yaris.
You buy a base model Yaris, but if you want to have a performance Yaris, for example, with a V6 engine and so on, that we do for a Toyota or something like that. There's going to be a higher cost. If you could put robotics into that, it would be cheaper, but it's not that simple. But that same argument could then go
when
across
it is there, you will definitely do it, because like you said, the consumer does want to pay for the same product but cheaper.
Consumer wants it cheaper, and your competitors will do it cheaper. So you've got to compete with your competition, and that's just the natural way that things work. But if our business, I can again only speak for ourselves, but if we were purely price driven, we would happily go, and profit driven, we'd happily go to Thailand or Mexico, and I'd be able to shave 30-40% off of my labor cost every single year, and our labor bill is enormous. It's in tens of millions of dollars a year, so that could be a big benefit to us. But I also think there's a value in being an Australian business that employs Australians and builds here and uses Australian suppliers and so on, because rightly or wrongly, I think that's an important brand value to have.
So with let's play it out to when things are heavily roboticized. A lot of things are automated. You're going to have hundreds of thousands of people that were working in these types of production line, manual sort of labor type jobs. They're no longer needed. What's the solution? Because I guess that one of the arguments is like a UBI, like a universal basic income, and then from there people can they've got the money to live, and then you can essentially do what you want. That argument gets so heavily criticized, and you're called like a socialist, and if you ever even think about like that as a valid option, right, that goes against all of capitalism. But that's sort of what happened with COVID. Like JobKeeper is essentially, for this year, we've had universal basic income for people that qualify for it. And I mean, for the people that I know personally, and they're not people that own businesses, they're just basic kind of the middle class, and they've had fucking great years. They're getting paid to go surfing, and they've done these trips, and they've done this sort of all of this lifestyle sort of shit that they couldn't have done because they would have just been working their job. It's like we figured out that it can work, and then if businesses are more efficient, products are cheaper because of automation in all of these different fields. It's like we're sort of doing a little bit of a trial run for how people would live just through this JobKeeper type situation.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think so the trials that have been done on universal basic income have been predominantly done in from what I understand, in Scandinavian countries, and they've done it in rural areas to try and see how it reacts, and they've had sort of mixed results. I guess I see what you're saying in the fact that we've had sort of I guess from a population perspective, we've had a trial run on universal basic income, and it's worked quite well. But
it's been a very short period of time.
It's been a short period of time, but also it's how we paid for it, because we paid for it by taking on debt and by printing money, and we've not really had the devaluation of the money, of the currencies, to be able to equalize the amount of inflation that we've had. And you look at the US as an example. I think this year, 25% of all US dollars in circulation globally were printed in the last 12 months. 25%, which is a fucking terrifying stat. But we haven't seen a 25% devaluation in the US dollar comparative to all of the other currencies in the world. So it seems to be artificially maintaining its price point. And when it comes to universal basic income, let's use Australia as an example. So JobKeeper has been primarily paid for through a myriad of different ways, but fundamentally and for the most part through taking on debt, borrowed money, printing, and so on. And the problem with that is that that's just taking on debt. So that's not really a solution to the problem, even though it's kind of the solution that everyone finds to most problems at the moment. Is money's so cheap, everyone just wants to take debt because it doesn't actually really cost anything. I guess
it's like a different issue, but has just currency in general lost its value? Because like for every...
You're going to get me talking about Bitcoin soon, so if we go down this route.
But I mean, for every 50% of everything that I don't know how to explain this, but it's like whatever you borrow, you double, you take on double that. Like, so there's just this ceiling that you can never actually catch up to.
It's just a scale of nonsense in different varying degrees. It's just, so it's all bollocks.
Have we all just lost, like, has our society just gone, it's up to shit? Is there a point where like that has to just tip completely and there's a hard reset? And I guess that might lead into Bitcoin, but I guess we could talk about that in the next bit. But I just didn't
you don't want to muddy the water.
Didn't want to forget about that. But
so I guess kind of the answer to that point is, where does the money come from? Because at the moment it's coming through debt because we don't have another mechanism to be able to afford it. But if you do have businesses that are becoming immensely more profitable through automation, theoretically, if you could apportion some of the savings that they have on the consumers and apportion that to increase taxes, for example, not on people, because I'm quite vehemently opposed to giving any more taxes to people, because I already think we're grossly overtaxed anyway. As not even in Australia, even in some European states, it's absolutely fucking shocking the amount of money that people spend per year on tax. But taxing corporations, I think, is an important way to find a solution for this. I mean, you look at especially some of the large global corporations, which may operate in a country like Australia and may earn billions of dollars of profits in this country, but because they're offshore, or they have a different structure, they actually pay minimal tax even on their earnings here, which is absurd. So the ultimate solution really is to push the universal basic income and spread it across the corporation taxes and so on, and the other tax mechanisms that currently exist to a certain degree. It may not fix the whole problem, but it should help some of the solution. But I think you probably need an economist who's far smarter than I am to be able to come up with the proper answer on this. But it seems to me that if you're going to be able to go to a universal basic income, you need to find a better mechanism to be able to afford it than just taking on debt, because that's not a solution. That's a short-term fix, as we've noticed now with COVID. But I think I read somewhere that the debt that's been taken out to support the people in Australia over the last year of COVID is going to take something like 7 or 8 years to pay off, which is actually a seriously long amount of time. So
when you consider that it's like all the running costs of Australia continue to accrue during those 7 7 years. Like this is extra on top of that.
Yeah, and a lot of businesses and industries actually did quite well during COVID, so we're paying their taxes and all that sort of thing. So it's a super complex issue that I don't pretend in the slightest to have an answer for.
I think that one of the things that could work, I mean, I feel like big business, like the real big business, would kind of just squash this shit anyway. But I feel like if there's a way in which the workers that lose their jobs to this automation process, or there's some kind of, I guess, union where, or you can own a machine. You know what I mean? Like if your job gets replaced, you're on this factory floor. Let's say this one robot does the job of 15 workers. Those 15 workers then get a share of that one robot kind of thing. It'd be a theoretical share.
Yeah, like a cooperative.
You know what I mean? So like everybody that is displaced by these jobs, they buy into it, and then they're paid out their UBI essentially through the work that the machine is doing. So you wouldn't have the corporation owning all of these, because essentially you don't have to pay a robot. Like it's a one-time sort of deal, you know.
Yeah,
so
you still need the capital up front to be able to purchase the machinery, I guess. So it's how you end up coming up with the mechanism that would be fairly allocated to the company, which is essentially taking on the risk of and the burden of the capital outlay initially, in order to pay it off over time as the machine works. And then if you're going to be apportioning some of that to labor that are no longer working for you, it's, you know, at some point, I think quite rightly, the company would sit there and say, what value I'm paying you guys, what value are you giving me? I'm just giving value to you, and that value is actually being pulled away from not only me as a business, but also as potential savings to our customers, which would then grow our business. And then, there's a risk of unrealized potential value as well. So I see what you're getting at, but I think that if you're looking at just reallocating money from a business that should be more profitable based on changing those behaviors, or, you know, investing capital into machinery that removes jobs, that makes the process more efficient or more profitable, then there's probably smarter mechanisms which you can allocate that money outside of having to have some sort of cooperative shareholding in the machinery. I think that the best way that we have currently of reallocating money is really taxes. The problem is that taxes aren't really allocated very well. And there's various reasons for that, and I'm oversimplifying everything, and I'm probably adding in a bit of Dunning-Kruger here as well by thinking I know more than I do on the subject. But
that's what we're here for, mate.
I'm happy to chat shit, so let's do it.
Well, it's fun. I think you could see that with the US election.
Yeah,
like that was just a clusterfuck, a complete schmozzle. Like
how shocking was it?
They still don't have a president, and it's like, when I was living there, I lived there through that initial Trump election from Obama to Trump, and everyone would say to me like, "Oh, as an Australian, I'm like, well, everyone's doing the same fucking thing wrong. The fact that you got to write on a piece of paper and then put it in a box of cardboard, and then you got to have people count the fucking bits of paper." What are we doing? What are we like? Let's just start with that for a start before we talk about what's wrong with the candidates, what's wrong with their let's just talk about the process of fucking picking these people.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And then people would say like, "Oh, but you know, like they could hack it if it was an electronic vote." I'm like, "Do you e-bank?" All of the world's money is electronically counted, and it seems fairly accurate. So it's like, you know, like you said, to innovation, there's room for innovation just in that one example. And I'm sure if we thought about it, there's 1,000 things where if there was like a corporate enterprise tasked with innovating certain things, but then, like you said, that can't happen.
It's a good point, and there's loads of different solutions that have already been spoken about countless times, from, you know, just doing standard, you know, essentially digitalizing the voting process, to using blockchain for trying to secure networks so that you can't get hacked, for example. You know, there's loads of different things. I mean, it is a genuine concern, because if you end up doing everything on your voter registry and the voting process online, you are at risk of hacking. But we have enormous amounts of information which can steer a whole bunch of global issues every single day, which are all online.
Constant.
And it's constant
risk.
And so we're at constant risk of that. And you know, the risk is, I probably think the risk would be greater in currently having the people writing with a pen and paper and putting it in a box, and then having some other person sitting there and counting it and all that sort of of stuff that's rife with potential risks of fraud.
Literally thousands and thousands of contact points where you could contaminate what you're trying to be, like essentially like an airtight procedure.
Yeah, and you know, the stories, not just in the US, but of people losing votes and, you know, things like that. I mean, I can't remember what I was with my girlfriend the other night. We were watching Superstore, which is a comedy on Amazon. And it's a bit like The Office, and they end up having this was before votes. This is before Trump, so this episode aired. I think it was Obama versus Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
And in the Superstore, they were one of the polling stations. And the whole joke of the episode is they have a big box of votes and they end up pouring coffee in it and fuck all the votes up, and then they're there and they're like, we're gonna go to jail for 10 years. And so that was taking the piss out of voter fraud before it obviously became the big issue that's become this year in the US. But that's much more risky than having it all digitalized, because when you've got it all digitalized, you can have a whole bunch of algorithms, protection algorithms, save keys, and so on, which are constantly looking at the data and can observe and correlate that, and are going to be much easier to expose things like, you know, rogue nation interference, like Russia trying to hack the polling station or something like that. You know, when you have it digitalized, you can actually have. Okay, you've got more risk of people being able to try and, you know, digitally hack into it, which is, in my opinion, a irrational risk compared to the security measures that we have. But you can actually have security measures which you can quantify, analyze, you can see and have oversight over the whole process constantly, you know, billions of times a second. So you can look for things that don't make sense and have them come up and be, you know, flagged and warned much easier than when you have everything done in the dark with a bunch of people in small rooms and stuff outside of Walmart in the middle of Pennsylvania. You know, it's such an archaic way of going about trying to do a process which we still hold so valuable in our society. Yeah. So.
And the end result at the end of this has been like democracy's been completely undermined, because you've got the the president saying, I'm still the president, and then the president-elect just like chilling.
Yeah, I mean, let's also remember the fact that Donald Trump was saying that he was going to get defrauded out of the election from day one while he was in there. So his whines and chants, anyone in the world with a brain could have predicted that Trump wasn't going to go out, you know, peacefully from being voted out. And you can guarantee that if he'd won the election, he would not be talking about voter fraud. He'd be saying that it was the fairest, greatest election of all time and all that sort of shit, right?
But the fact the fact that someone can even make that statement is like kind of the problem, right? Like that doesn't that undermine what we're sort of doing? Because, you know, you get, let's say you've got this digital election that works quite well, and, you know, you've got the live count. It's literally, there's two parties. There's a blue line and a red line. The fucking red line wins, or the blue line wins. And it's like, there's just no room to even say that. Yeah.
No, there isn't. And, you know, it's difficult. So I don't think there's actually any country. I think it's one of the Scandinavian countries that seem to be the most advanced in a lot of these sort of issues.
I love all the weird shit.
But they just seem to be more, you know, socially advanced when it comes to taking risk on these things and just being more logical and rational about how they process stuff. And I can't remember which country it is, but one of them, I think you can vote. And I think that for the next election, they said they were going to be able to vote using your all your information from home. So if you've got a smart TV, an Xbox, or a PlayStation, which is particularly valuable for young voters who don't really want to go out and get off their ass and go and vote, which is obviously large. But it's true though, right?
100%.
It was me at uni. I woke up hungover on my first ever day I could vote in the UK, and I was like, fuck, I can't be bothered to get on. That's pissing down with rain. I'm here. I'm hungover. I just want to sit on my sofa. You know, my vote's not going to matter anyway. That kind of attitude. But when 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people have that same attitude,
exactly.
But if you can then bring that process to them, no different than we've done with everything else that technology's been able to do, you're making things faster, cheaper, better, more, you know, easier to access and so on. There's no reason why you couldn't do that with voting as well. If you had a strong enough, more robust enough software system and application that you could end up allowing people to use. I mean, why haven't we got an app that allows us to vote? You put all your information in, uses the IP address of your computer or your phone or something like that. You can have your fingerprints and all that sort of stuff done there, and you don't have to get off. You can wake up in the morning on voting day, press your thumb on, do all your facial recognition and stuff, and then that's your vote, and it goes through and it gets counted automatically by the software systems and independently verified by multiple different, you know, NGOs and all that sort of stuff to make sure that the software is working.
Like in the same way that when you're at an ATM, they record
your face,
your inputs as well. So like you could do that. There's a front camera on every phone, and then you could have pressure sensitive recordings on every touch. Like you could record, like in a sense, analog record the voting process as well. But I think like I've been massive on just direct democracy. Like, I don't think that we need to speak before about the way that there's this bureaucratic mess of basically every Western government. Let's just get rid of most of the politicians, in the sense of, like, I've always had the idea, it's probably got more holes than a sieve, but you've got this, you've got an app that everyone's got on your phone. You don't have to vote. It's completely optional. You can vote on any issue that's within. You've got like national issues that you're allowed to, everyone in the nation's obviously allowed to vote on. You've got state issues that you can vote on if you live in the state, and then you've got local issues if you live in X distance of whatever the issue is that's being voted on. But not everybody can vote. There's a series of things that you have to read, and then you get a super simple quiz just based on the material. If you can answer those correctly, that includes arguments for and against the bill that you want to vote on. So you would have had to read both sides of the argument. Then you can just directly submit a vote, and then from there you just would have less, I guess, politicians that want to argue these laws, and more just like committees that are tasked with actually implementing what has been voted. And then I think that you are going to get a ton of people that just don't give a fuck and don't want to, but then I guess that puts this accountability back on people that are new. Like, I think gay marriage would probably be like the perfect example for that type of. But
didn't we have that? Didn't we have a vote for gay marriage?
Yeah, but so I guess implementing this system would be like, it just comes to mind as an easy thing. Like, everyone can vote on it.
Yeah.
You've got to read material, because that's a big problem with just politics in general now, is that the way that Facebook algorithms, Instagram, YouTube, all these algorithms are set up, like, you kind of just get sent on a rabbit hole in the direction that you...
It's just a goldfish bowl, yeah.
That you lean. So, having a setup that would make you read both sides of the argument before you can even have a say. But let's just say you do that for gay marriage. You might have all these people that... let's say that law gets passed because they're tech savvy people that actually wanted to go and vote. And then you get all the people who are like, well, fucking, we didn't want that. And that's like, well, you got to vote. And then you've got to read the material. So it's like you would have this core group of people, I think, that would be very active, constantly reading the literature around things and constantly making these informed decisions. And then if society starts kind of going this way and enough people feel like they're missing out on their vote, then hey, it's right there. The app's on your phone. You just have to read both sides. It's not super complicated, legal, you know what I mean? But you get these, you have to be at least semi-educated on both sides of the coin before you can make a yes or no vote. But I think that, down the track, like, that seems like, to me, the logical way to do it. I don't think that I should have to vote for one person that then, like, I don't agree with my mum on everything.
No.
I love my fucking mum. I don't agree with her on everything. So why should I vote for one politician and then whatever that dude says for the rest of the 4 years, I agree with everything he says?
Yeah, it's a good point. There's obviously some risk around what you're saying, because then who decides what the two sides of the argument are, and who puts that into the information pack that the person has to read, and how can that get manipulated? And you can guarantee that if there's something which is like, should we ban petrol cars, for example, you can guarantee that the oil lobbyists will be putting everything they can into making sure that literature is very, very one-sided to try and inform the vote, plus all the marketing they're doing in the back end to target those groups and all that sort of stuff. So how you manage that would be quite difficult. But
I don't think you could do it on every single issue.
No,
it'd be too much. Yeah,
it would be, and also you've got to be really careful on the issues you choose, because there's some things that are just too complex for most people to be able to comprehend. I'll use something like what's a health issue? Okay, let's use an example which is topical. So the COVID vaccine, anti-vaxxers are losing their little minds at the moment because they're all terrified about the vaccine coming out and coming up with a whole bunch of completely spurious claims.
You don't even have to go any further. You're so fucking right. There's people that think that Wi-Fi is going to kill them.
Yeah, I mean,
so you're right. Maybe I'm fucking retarded even thinking that people should have any responsibility.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean. But that's a byproduct of a poor education system.
Yeah,
because if you actually have a good education system, which allows you and teaches you how to think logically value information, it helps you understand the complexity of issues, so you don't end up falling into Dunning-Kruger where you think that complex subjects are actually really simple, because you're actually, without sounding rude, you're too stupid and uneducated to actually understand the complexity of the topic. So you simplify it in your own mind, and so it's one of those things where if you want to go and have this new voting structure like you're talking about, if you can come up with a system where you have an education system that's more supportive of those kind of mindsets and those kinds of teachings, that would probably be able to work. But at the moment, I don't think we do have that. And one of the issues, and there's a great podcast I listened to a fair while ago about this on Wondery, which was they were talking about how the education system is fundamentally flawed, and the reason that we have so many people who are so gullible watch, a couple of YouTube videos from some naturopath arsehat who left school at 14 and just drinks ayahuasca all year and suddenly thinks that he's a genius on vaccinations, has got more value than an immunologist who did 7 years of medical school, 35 years of practicing it, and knows everything about the subject. That their opinion is valueless or equal in value to some idiot that I've just watched a YouTube video on with no credentials whatsoever. And it's crazy, but people are genuinely doing that at a more rapid pace. And it's not just on vaccinations, it's on a whole bunch of things. There was YouTube videos going around that even my friends who are relatively educated were sharing, which was, some guy who was claiming that viruses don't actually exist and there's never been a confirmed virus. And you're sitting there like, the fuck do people believe this? But that's, again, it's a product of the education system, not educating people on how to critically evaluate information, how to understand the credibility of sources and the information you're getting, to be able to also understand your own biases, how you naturally end up looking at your own things that confirm your own bias, because you don't actually want things that you learn that tell you you're wrong. It's much easier just to ignore that and then focus on things that even if it's wrong, you're getting bits of information that they confirm that pre-existing bias or idea that you have, and actually reinforce it. And then you got things like you've done in Kruger and cognitive dissonance and all these other things.
And now it's easier than ever to join a tribe.
Exactly,
that
it's a
believes
community
in whatever you want.
And so people get confused. They want to have answers, generally simple answers of what they're looking for. There's communities of people that do that. You get called names or stupid or stuff if you believe something which is fringe, even if it might be right and you are believing something stupid, like the earth is flat. But you sit there and say, obviously, actually, no, it's not, it's a donut shape, but the problem is that they end up congregating in these little sort of fringe communities with other people that all agree that each other are right, and actually everyone else is an idiot, and we're the smart ones, we're the ones that have found the truth, and all this other stuff is just a facade. And it just continues to reinforce. And as you say, the problem with all the social media is that you end up having the algorithm just reinforces things that you already believe in. It just gives you more and more data of things that they know you already want to engage in, and so it ends up giving you a false sense of security in the feeling that there's that your views are more commonly held than they really are. And so it ends up just creating this massive concentration effect, and that goes for fringe things like flat earthers, but it also goes for things like politics now. So if you're right wing or left wing or centrist, and it doesn't matter, all you're getting is information which is constantly pushing your pre-existing bias, and that's not giving you a perspective. And we used to have perspective. We used to have newspapers where even that before the internet, our parents would be sitting there and getting most of their information from the news and newspapers. But they also understood that each newspaper had a different bias, like a Fox News or a CNN. But it was nowhere near
obvious. It's in America now too, crazy obvious.
But it's become extreme, right? And it's become far more extreme than we've ever seen or witnessed previously. But again, sometimes I speak to my American friends and they're like, "Yeah, Fox News is right. CNN is so biased." I'm like, "Dude, are you fucking kidding? Like, they're both biased. They're both aggressively biased on each different side. One's not right or wrong. They're both very, very aggressively biased." But I've got my own opinion on each one anyway. But the problem is that our parents used to know, when they used to read a newspaper, like a Murdoch newspaper, for example, that they knew that it was going to be more right wing. At least in the UK it was, and then in the UK, then you got more left wing, like Guardian. But they knew and understood that the information they were getting was going to have a slant. Whereas now, for some reason, so many people that I talk to, they seem so aggressively, passionately sure in themselves that what they believe isn't slanted, and it's not biased, and everything else is. So that mindset shift of understanding that what you're reading, you've got to take everything with a pinch of salt, is now shifted to what I believe is right, because I've got all these other variables in my life, like on my Facebook feed, Twitter feed, Instagram feed, which is confirming that, and I'm now on the side of correct and you're on the side of wrong. And I think that's what's also creating a lot of the social injustice and strife and fragmentation in the US, because you've now got these two sides. It's like they're at war, to a certain degree, and that's only going to keep getting worse while we have these mechanisms in place. I don't understand how, without these mechanisms being significantly changed, and there's so many to change over such a vast amount of influence on all of our lives, I don't understand how you find a solution for that, because it seems so ingrained in what we are now. It takes a pretty big shift in a whole bunch of different areas to be able to pull yourself out of that.
Well, the problem is that this has been at the start with COVID, I was like, you know what, this is maybe a good thing in the sense that it gives us perspective that the family in China that is, barely getting by and works in a sweatshop or whatever, they're dealing with the same virus as we are.
Yep.
And then the people that are in the favelas in Brazil and the people that are in Texas, this is now like a global problem. And you would hope that would give you like a sense of global community in a way, in the same way where you talk about people after 9/11 in New York, there was just like this real community thing. But all that fades eventually. And it's like, what does it take? Like, the scary thing is what it actually does take to have like a lasting impact is something like a Great Depression or like a world war. But we're sort of to the point where you head into that territory now in 2020 with all the shit that's available, then that's just, we sort of can't go there. So it's like, how do you make a radical change without a extremely radical problem?
I've got a pretty strong view on this. I think hope is a much stronger force than fear for medium to long term. Fear is a much stronger force for short term issues because it's a survival instinct thing. And a lot of the things that we see play out is heavily fear based, and it's fear based because it's a reaction. It gets clicks on the news and so on. But when we actually look at things that have really benefited the world, it's mainly science and technology. It's coming up with something which develops hope and brings communities together for a goal which is bigger than ourselves. And I forget the quote, but I believe it was when we had the first moon landing, and I think it was Buzz Aldrin, or I'm going to get this wrong, so I can't remember which astronaut it was, but they looked out and we saw the Earth for the first ever time from another object in space. And it was he's called it the pale blue dot, and he said that all the bullshit that's going on in the world, I'm obviously not exactly, I don't think he said bullshit when he was sat on the moon, saying something quite profound, but essentially he was saying that all the politics and all the war and all the hatred and anger and all the division and stuff on Earth just looks so insignificant when you actually look at the Earth from so far away. And so I think that when you actually come up with ideas of how to bring people together, I think hope is something that people want. And it doesn't necessarily have to be hope for something locally. It could be hope for something, for example, coming up with the idea that we're going to all join together and we're going to try and conquer the task of going to Mars or something like that. Those big objectives, those big missions that forced everyone to work together. We've seen that it can happen, because we saw it with the International Space Station. It's the International Space Station for a reason, and it managed to be a huge international funding and operational effort between a whole bunch of countries and scientific communities that, even though, at the time, the Chinese and the Americans, haven't been getting along very well during that process, and the Chinese and the Russians. It seems like a lot of people seem to struggle with America by not saying it like this, but these scientific communities, they pushed all the political bullshit aside, and they all worked together to create this incredible, fantastic goal of having an international space station for communal scientific research in space for whatever country you are around the world. And I think that those things are some of the triumphs of humanity, because I don't think much is really accomplished when it's so divided, but I think when we look to try and come up with an almost unachievable objective, an unachievable mission, and you all end up doing it together, it helps you put aside all the petty shit and actually gives you something which we can all work together on, and makes you realize that together we're stronger. So what I'd love to see is going forward, and we saw this a little bit with the space race, even though that initially it was a anti-Russia, anti-America thing, but it certainly was something in America that joined a lot of people together.
Yeah.
And then we've seen that evolve into what it is today, which is from the stems of the Cold War. Things like the International Space Station, Hubble Space Telescope, and things like that, and new objectives to go and explore further things into space. So I think when it comes to trying to find something in hope, genuinely the real things that show real results in that area are things of human achievement, and that generally involves science and technology, not politics and bureaucracy.
Man, what you said about hope that's so intrinsic to not just humanity, but just all of life. Hope is something that it doesn't die until death itself. And you can cut a snake with a shovel, and that thing's still gonna slither around. Your heart beats completely automatically. You breathe. There's all of these processes that are built into life itself that it's so automatic, and there's constant hope even at the literally until it's gone. And it is you need to tap into that in terms of your psychology, not just like on a biological level, because on a biological level that exists in its most complete form, and you've got no control over it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then it's how you end up using that as well, because it's great to come up with an idea that you think will bring a lot of people together. And I'll just use an example. I'm not saying this is it, but let's say it's, to set up a colony on Mars, we're going to have to, get all the countries around the world to work together to go and accomplish that enormous task. Forget all your military budgets and all that sort of shit. Let's put that money into something which is genuinely going to benefit humanity. Or another thing could be coming up with, nuclear fusion, for example, coming up with fusion reactors, which would essentially solve all of our energy problems. So it would be they would have the same impact on our society today as the Industrial Revolution had back in the turn of the century. Exactly. So it's an enormous benefit for getting this solved. But at the moment, we spend so much money fighting with each other, arguing with each other, whether that's nationally with politics or globally with every kind of no, that's important, or was. But I think coming up with things like that just is an opportunity to bring people together, and I think we need more of that, because so much is focused on trying to divide each other at the moment, be that in the media, be that in social media, be that the attitudes that people have, that sometimes we need to sort of reset ourselves and actually start reminding each other that actually we're all together in this, and there's not enemies in all of us. Actually, we're all the same. We just got pushed in different directions. But it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, what you believe, what political side you are, what religion you are, if you're gay, straight, or anything else. We're all human beings. And when you have something which is an objective for all of humanity, and it needs to be, intrinsically above the sort of psychology of just stuff that happens day to day on planet Earth. We need some sort of objective or goal to move ourselves forward. And I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. I'd love to, but I think that historically that's been something which has been a pretty profound changer in how we can try and divert ourselves away from a lot of the day-to-day bullshit that actually, in the universal scheme of things, is completely and utterly irrelevant.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring up the quote from the first moonwalk, and it just says that the Earth is just this little sort of blue dot. Like, everybody can do that exercise with themselves. Like, if you're at this distance to me and I'm like, oh, what am I? And you're like, oh, you're Jace, you're sitting over there, right there. And then if you go back 100 meters, you're like, oh, you're a way smaller version of yourself, but you're still you.
Yeah.
And then you go back 3 kilometers and you're like, oh, you're kind of burly. Like, you just look like the Gold Coast. And let's say you're going out. And then you keep zooming out, and then I keep asking the question, what am I now? And you're
it's
like...
perspective.
Exactly. And I think that everybody, at some point, if you zoom out from yourself far enough, then you are the blue dot. Like, that same thing holds true for everybody as like an individual person. If you zoom out far enough from yourself, from the perspective of somebody that you can talk to right then and there, then you do become everything. And then you can do the same way when you go in. Like, if you go and hold, right now you're here, and then you get closer and you go, oh, you're just a nose and 2 eyes, and now you're skin, and then you keep going further and further into that. Then you get down to the layer of, oh, your DNA, now you're just molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of mostly nothing. So you get to a point on the inverse of that where I'm essentially nothing. So I'm nothing and everything all at the same time. And if people could like have that insight daily, think about that 3 times daily. Well, I'm everything and nothing kind of at the same time. It sort of would give you more of that perspective, maybe, you know.
I think it's a good point. I think another thing that I think really helps enhance that is kind of what we were talking about earlier, which is travel. So I've learned more about being a human from visiting different cultures than I probably have from anything else. And I think that you can learn about that in school, you can read about it, but going and visiting places like Thailand and China and Japan and Russia and Africa and countries in Africa like Botswana and, you know, South Africa and Mozambique and things like that, you know, when you go and visit these different cultures, you actually realize that you think you're grown up and you taught in a certain community and society that this is the way that things happen, this is the way we do things, and you naturally, not through any fault of your own, but you naturally start thinking that's the way that things are and that's the best way that things should be, because you know no different, you know, you've got no perspective.
You've just got the smallest reference point.
Exactly. So, you know, I think there's a really famous quote, and I can't remember again who said it, but he said, you know, the only thing that you spend money on that makes you richer is travel. Everything else you spend money on just makes you poorer. And I think that's quite a wise quote, because, you know, it genuinely does. If you go and embrace it, you know, you can learn so much from going and visiting, you know, some impoverished people in a favela in Brazil. And I did that recently with Hales. You know, we spent a day, you know, walking around the favelas and meeting people, and you know, and you just learn so much about those people's way of life. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your way of life is better than theirs or vice versa, but it just gives you a different perspective, and it gives you more understanding on how different people think differently about all different things, or think differently about the same thing, which is often even more valuable in trying to learn how you get perspective. So yeah, it's an interesting point.
Was there like one particular thing when you first went to a third world country or a different country what really hit you? Because I've had a couple, one of which though was in Vietnam, and I mean I'd traveled quite a bit before this, but this one really hit me fucking like, I was like, oh dude,
in the fields.
This is a good one. But this kid was probably 7 or 8 years old, and he just had like this little bucket of like kerosene and shit, and a pack of lighters, and this kid's deal was like he just would fire breathe for tourists. Tiny kid doing this fire breathing show, and for some reason that just really fucking got me. And it just instant hit of perspective of whatever your problems are. At 8 years old, I definitely did not have to hustle for cash in Ho Chi Minh by spitting fire out of my mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I probably had a few big nights out where I've probably done that just for fun. But
yeah, man,
Sam was probably next to me, fucking egging me on. Nah, use 3 lighters this time, Ryan, you pussy.
Let's get out the race fuel.
Yeah. Fuck, that would hurt.
This fire breathing is brought to you by Mobile One.
I think, yeah, there's a few things. I mean, in India is one of the countries I spent a lot of time in that's, you know, pretty thought-provoking in how you see, you know, there's a few things that give you some perspective there. I'll give you one example. I was doing some business with Tata, one of the largest companies on earth and one of the largest Indian companies.
What do they do?
Like everything, huge conglomerate. They've got an automotive business.
Yeah.
And they, I think they're the biggest truck company in India, which is enormous just by itself. It's a big country with a lot of trucks. So I think it dwarfs a lot of other truck companies. But they've got a car company as well. And we actually ended up importing them here for a little bit, but it didn't really work out. But it did mean I spent a lot of time over there. And there was one guy who I think it was, I won't give his exact position because I don't want to talk specifics, but there was someone who worked there, one of the top management executives of the business. And, you know, we're in this big skyscraper, he's there in his suit, and, you know, we got to know him pretty well, went out for dinners and stuff. And he ended up opening up at one time. He said, we were talking about our houses and stuff like that, and he'd been on holiday, and he's like, oh, you know, I don't really go on holiday very often. I just go on holiday if I go for work or travel, but I don't go on holiday. I was like, you know, well, where's your house? And he goes, oh, well, my house is in the slums over here. I was quite shocked. So I was like, you're a big executive at a large multinational corporation, one of the biggest in the world. Now that kind of hit me. I was like, you live in one of the slums? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I live in a little one bedroom house in the slums. It's, with all the, corrugated iron roof and a satellite dish. And he's like, I've got a TV, so I'm happy. And I live there with my wife in the same room with my 5 kids. And I'm like, fuck,
Wow.
then, for whatever reason, I didn't have the perspective that someone who could be in a high position role in a business like that would be in the same kind of bracket as, the kind of people you would expect would be living in the slums and in impoverished parts of Mumbai. So that was something that resonated quite hard. I didn't realize that it was that prevalent, the amount of people that actually live like that, and I think that's maybe some of my privilege and my upbringing, but I just, for whatever reason, that just really struck home. And there was another one when I was in India, which was when we were at the Formula One for the first ever Delhi Grand Prix. I think it only went on for a couple of years. Actually, there was 2 things on that trip. One of them was when I was talking to some of the guys. They were all proud of their new racetrack and their new building, which was okay. It was quite a pretty racetrack, to be honest. And they kept saying, only 65 people died building this. Only 65 people died building this, as if that was a massive accomplishment. And I was like, fuck, 65 people died building this. Like, if one person died in the UK building this, it would be front page news, massive drama, huge health and safety. Shut the track down. Health and safety on all the construction company doing this. And there'd be audits and fines and all sorts of stuff. But they were like, 65 people will only died. This is one of the best big projects we've had like this in ages. How good's our health and safety? I was like, so that just, again, from a perspective point of view, they thought that was good, because comparatively to some other construction projects of that similar size, there were expectations, the amount of people that would have died during the process of construction would have been far, far greater. So that was that gives you an idea about how people value life differently. And I guess the ultimate way that people value life differently, which I learned when I was in India, was in going to the track. On the first day, on this big it's a 4-lane motorway, but in India they've managed to somehow turn it into an 8-lane motorway, and everyone's just sort of pushed together, and there's animals on the fucking road and all sorts of stuff. And then there's a cow that no one's allowed to move, someone's got to go around it, and all that sort of stuff. And there was like a dude who was asleep on the side of the road, or looked like he was asleep on the side of the road, and we went past him. It was like he had a big night. And then we came back and he was still there, and I said to Haley, I was like, I think that guy might be dead. Next morning, drive past and the same guy's there. No. Come back. I said, so the guy had obviously been hit or something like that, or died in the side of the road. And we did that trip for, Haley, how many times did we do it? 4 times? Yeah, 4 times.
Wow.
There and back. And on the last day, he was still there. And this was in hot Delhi, 40-degree heat and all that sort of stuff. And his body was just left there. No one, like thousands and thousands, if not tens or even hundreds of thousands of people would have driven past that body, and not a single person thought about picking it up, which is kind of shocking to me. Yeah. But that's just, again, it's just the difference in how people, value life, or how they operate their communities. You can't go and say that's the wrong thing, even though I may think it is. But it's just a different way of how they go about their lives, and how they value life, or how they value bodies and things like that. So
the frustrating thing with that is that we live in a society where none of that shit happens, and everyone still carries on as though life's that hard. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And that's sort of one of the things that is kind of frustrating about living in, you can go to Bali or, Thailand and places like that, and you can, I've done some like martial arts camps where you just sort of live in a hut, and it's not super glamorous, and you can just be so happy. No one's complaining. No one's bummed about their situation. They're mum and dad sort of deals is in their house cooking you great food. Yeah. And then you can come back home. You can, you be in a place where they've got literally nothing. You come back home and then everything's a problem again. And you're just like, if it's not a problem for these people that have it way harder, objectively harder too. Not harder in the, the sense that you'd make it up in your mind. Yeah. Like, they don't have hot water. They don't have electricity. Objectively, their life is harder than ours. Yeah. And you can see people here that complain.
Yeah, but people love to complain, don't they? And you can tell how soft a lot of us have become by. And I was actually talking about this, I think, with Sam the other night when we went out for some beers. We're always going out with beers with you, isn't it? There was never I was having this time at Sam's house and we're just having a nice conversation. It's always I was having beers with Sam.
Sam made me a delightful cup of English breakfast.
No, be nice, But we were talking about it. I was saying, with all the people who are kicking off about masks and masks being they were feeling oppressed because they were wearing masks. I was like, fuck, just under 100 years ago, people were being pulled out of school at 16 years old, given a rifle, and sent across the world with no idea when you were coming home to go and fight an army in another country that you barely heard of. And they just got up and did it for their own civil duty and because that was the right thing to do. And during COVID, one of the things we've all been asked to do is wear a mask. That's it. And sit at home. Yeah. And that's now, we're being oppressed. You're not being fucking oppressed. You're just doing a really simple, easy task, which is uncomfortable. And yes, it's not perfect. And no one really wants to do it. But considering some of the other, torments and turmoil that we've had as a species over the years, it's pretty low down the oppression list.
Well, but you talk about oppression, more people are enslaved right now than ever before in all of human history.
Yeah. Where's all the people in the US? And I use that as an example only because I saw this stat recently where 25% of the global international prison population are just in the US. 25%. So everyone's...
just thought about this the other day.
All these people are sitting there in the US and they're complaining about being oppressed with masks and causing such a fuss about it. Like enormous, like people are carrying on civil liberty. They're on their social media daily screaming about it as if it's the worst thing that's ever happened in their entire lives. But where are the people who are actually looking at things that are actually genuinely, demonstrably issues in their society? It just all gets, they just cover over those cracks and ignore it. But again, it's because I think a lot of people just become quite soft to things. And I think also going back to what we were saying earlier, it's easy to rile people up because people are just getting all their views reinforced, and probably a lot of these people, they don't even know the fact that there's massive issues in their own country, and that goes to Australia, that goes to the UK. Every country's got their problems, right? We're being unfair on using the US as an example. I'm just saying that because that was
just so easy.
It's but
it is.
Well, when you're looking at something like that, it is. But yeah, again, it all comes down to perspective again, right?
Yeah. Well, I thought that the other day I had someone mention the US incarceration rate.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can you be called the leader of the free world when your country has the highest percentage of people that are literally not free?
Yeah.
Like there's some weird, obviously freedom isn't free if that's the case.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I just didn't realize it was that high. I thought countries with much larger populations like India or China would have been at least close, but they're really not. So
no,
it's actually pretty shocking.
Have you seen like the LA County Jail that's on I'm pretty sure it's on like the 10 freeway. It's either on the 10 or the 405. Like right as the exit where you get off to go into Hollywood.
Oh yeah.
There's just this enormous prison, and it's just like right downtown LA, huge prison.
No, I've never seen it. I'm sure I've seen it in films or something like that or documentaries, but I've not seen it physically.
I lived there for years before I realized that was a prison.
Really?
And then it was very startling to actually realize.
What did you think it was? All the barbed wire and stuff.
Well, it was just but it's not barbed wire.
Is it not?
It's a high-rise building. But there's just the windows, they've just got like bars across the windows, but it just doesn't look out of place at all. I think from a certain angle you can see like some barbed wire fencing around the roof. They've got like helipads. And I think that's how I ended up noticing it, was like a LAPD heli landed on the top of it, and then I could see it. But it's like, it was so crazy to just see like there's big businesses, there's like a Cisco office, and there's like AT&T, and then big old prison, just massive thing. You're just like, damn. And then there's so many other issues around it, but it's just like, to be the country that is the free leader of the free world, to have the most people incarcerated, seems like it's quite contradictory.
Yeah, you think so? Yeah.
What science stuff? You said you like reading science books. What is a go-to science book for you?
Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time is really, really good.
Oh, I haven't read that one yet.
It's not too long. I think it's only about 200 pages, so you can sit down in a couple of sittings and get through it pretty quickly. But to get a relatively basic understanding about some really complex issues around time and matter and mass and so on, and gravity, I found that really, really helpful. Another one, which was by a guy called Professor Brian Cox, was called E equals MC squared, or Y equals MC squared, which again explains Einstein's theory of relativity, how that works with light speed, mass and gravity, how they all interact together, and how space and time are a fabric woven into each other, and anything with mass or gravity, which is a result of mass, how it can be manipulated and changed, and how it's ultimately you end up getting things like black holes and supermassive black holes, and how stars are formed, and when they collapse, they in supernovas and become white dwarfs or neutron stars or black holes and so on, like how all those mechanisms work, but also the really relatively basic science behind it. And I use basic really carefully because it's not. I'm going to show my ignorance here.
Basic principles that when extrapolated give you these extreme phenomena.
Exactly right. And I thought that was Brief History of Time is a really good one because it does a really good job of explaining in relatively simple terms really complex issues, which I think is a bit of an art. Because science is an incredibly complex topic, and one of the reasons why science is distrusted, and there's a lot of anti-intellectualism out there in the world, and there's a lot of people who distrust science, and that then mitigates itself into a whole bunch of different areas. But the ultimate thing with being able to try and bridge that gap is to try and make science more approachable. And I've got a lot of time for scientific writers and scientific documentaries that are clever enough to explain really complex things in a really simple way. And I'll give you one example, which is how light speed works. So light speed is a really complicated topic. And when someone says, the universal speed limit is light, you can't travel faster than light, you sit there and say, well, why? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why can't things travel faster than light? It seems like such a strange, concept. But when you understand how light and then time works and how gravity works, and then you understand how space and time are interlinked together, and you understand that as you end up using the laws of relativity and so on, and you end up going faster, you end up being faster relative to something else. Yeah. And so when you end up, and I'll give you an example, if you're and the way that they describe it is you're on a train. And so they imagine that the train you're on is going at 99.999 recurring the speed of light. So it's not at the speed of light, because theoretically at the speed of light, time would stand still. And if you got over the speed of light, if you could, which you can't, time would theoretically go backwards. I think I'm going to have a physicist who listens to this and says, you're fucking wrong, Walkinshaw.
There are no physicists that listen to
well, there might be now. But the idea is if you're on that train, you're traveling at essentially the speed of light. And if you were to stand up and then take a step forward, you, relative to the train, which is already traveling at the speed of light, would essentially be going faster than the speed of light. So what happens is that the speed of light relative to everything else in the universe, you're then the fastest object. So you then become the speed of light, and the train essentially slows down relative to you, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Yeah. And then when you understand that concept about relativity and relativity in time, it opens up this incredible discussion, which is how time is essentially interwoven with this fabric in the universe, but every single different point experiences time at a different rate relative to everything else. And so even if you have things like the way that time travel works, you can't go back in time, but you can slow down time for yourself comparatively to relative to everything else. You can't go and get in a time machine, but what you can do, and this is the example that I've used several times, is if you go on a spaceship and you travel 10 years at the speed of light, turn around, travel 10 years back, you'd have aged 20 years. But on Earth, everyone else would have aged about 100, because relative to you, the faster you go, the less you age relative to everything else. And it sounds, that just sounds like science fiction bullshit, but it's something which is proven countless times.
Measurable with, like you said,
we do it the whole time.
Equations.
We've got atomic clocks that are on the International Space Station, which is traveling at 23,000 miles an hour, and then you've got the same nuclear clock on Earth, and when they come back together, you find out that the one that's been in space is now slower. It's aged less than the atomic clock below on Earth. But then you've got another example, which is like the Large Hadron Collider, which is the largest particle accelerator in the world in CERN. We're dealing with that effect of speed of light and velocity relative to everything else, slowing down time the whole time. If they didn't do that, the whole thing wouldn't fucking work, because when they end up accelerating particles to 99.999% the speed of light in the particle accelerator, you'll have atomic particles that decay, and you know that the decay rate in a stagnant test, if you just create them and have them in a bowl, for example, they measure and they die at 5 minutes, and then they're gone, they're out of existence, or they've become something else. When you put them in the accelerator, they'll last for hours and hours, for example, because of the speed they're going relative. So again, all this stuff is proven, but it's and when you understand that, again, I think it goes a little bit, we keep talking about perspective, but when you understand all these big complex issues and the people simplify them, and you start to understand them, it gives you a perspective on things which is far more valuable, in my opinion, than a lot of the stuff that we get fed day to day, because these are interesting concepts, and if more people spend more time understanding all this sort of stuff
for your daily life, way more. But honestly, they are way more than you would normally think.
Yeah, I think so too. They're just, people don't value them, or because I think a lot of the time to teach it is hard, because you to try and teach it in a way that's simple enough that you can grasp it. Once you've grasped it, then you can then extrapolate it and learn the more detail. I think one of the biggest issues is that it's so intimidating for people when they don't understand it. People don't really like not understanding things, and it's easier just to say I don't like it or I don't trust it. And that's what creates a lot of the anti-science and anti-intellectualism rhetoric that you see today.
I have done the bulk of my reading over the last, I'd say, 10 years has been around more like psychology and philosophy. And I've pretty much gone like extremely deep into that. And then that's led me into like Eastern philosophy and meditation. And then, believe it or not, after 2 years of reading that, I've gone back to science. Because so much in science, and that's why I wanted to ask you about what you're reading, because I've got a list of books now that I've just bought off Amazon. I think I ordered 13 books the other day that were all in this vein, and it's because you get super deep into some of like the complex theories of meditation and human consciousness, which is it's really cool, because there's like a direct middle ground between Eastern mysticism and then cutting edge neuroscience. They're talking about the same things in terms of what we don't know about consciousness. They kind of end in the same spot, but then to learn things as simple as there's no such thing as color in the real world. We actually perceive color due to receptors that we have on the back of our eyes, and that creates for our brain a projection of color. And even the fact that essentially your brain is just an organ in a vat. None of us have ever actually experienced the outside world. Our eyes have delivered us signals that have then been interpreted by the brain, and then our consciousness creates this projection of what we call reality. But the reality that we see isn't an objective reality. It's just one that is measured by the sense organs that we've been given. So then to get into science, like that's such a useful way to use science, like to basically what that does to me, to talk about perspective again, is just to say, well, what I call real really isn't even real, and there's no way of experiencing what I say I'm so sure about.
But isn't that quite humbling though? Isn't that one of the great things about science, is that it actually humbles you? Instead of you thinking you know all the answers and you know everything that's right, it actually gives you a much broader understanding on what's going on. And the more you learn, first of all, the more you learn, the more you realize how stupid you were. It's always the idiots that are the most sure about things. It's always the smartest people I know who are always the most skeptical and the most full of doubt. And I think that there's always a far more beautiful story in the complex reality of things than there is about the simplified lies about stuff. And I think that having a strong education, or at least some sort of interest in those sort of subjects, whether it's neuroscience, even if it's philosophy, or even ancient philosophy and things like that, which I don't read a lot of it, but I'm sure there's some valuable stuff in there as well. It gives you some perspectives on things which are different. But But I think that that's really, really important. It's something that's so severely lacking now, because most people, when they leave school, that's pretty much it for their understanding. And, let's be honest,
they don't do that good of a job.
Yeah, they don't do that much of a good of a job. And to be honest, I didn't really start getting into science until my last couple of years of school. And it's only because I had one teacher who was basically said that the school curriculum on physics is dog shit, and he just actually in most of our lessons just taught us really interesting things, and he's who sort of ignited my passion in science. I was like, actually, fuck, this is actually genuinely interesting. Like, this isn't just writing lambda and doing a bunch of equations on a board, which just sounds like horrible math, which I hated. He was explaining what the math meant, which I thought was much more beautiful, especially for someone like me who's naturally more creative in their mindset. And much more visual. It made me appreciate things a lot more, being able to see what it meant as opposed to just seeing numbers on a board. But I think most people just see numbers on a board and then they just, that's it. That's their experience, which I don't think is particularly inspiring. So I can understand why it's wrong, but I think that if we can, some people manage to do it in the right way, and those who embrace that and try to understand it, I think are genuinely better for it. Yeah,
you're so right in saying that there is the more you know, the less you know, essentially. And it's I think people are scared off by coming to these realizations.
Yeah, 100%.
I always now, whenever I see the color red, I'm like, I don't even fucking know what that is. I don't. And I don't even know if you experience the same color red as I do. I definitely know he doesn't. He's fucking colorblind. And it's like, that's it. He's literally does not live in the same reality as I do. Yeah. It's not the same thing.
On many levels.
In so many ways.
I love how Sam was like, I'm not getting in on this podcast, but what you've done is sort of sit there chuckling and chirping occasionally.
It's perfect. But there's something that, to me, like there's an Indian guru who I don't particularly like a lot of his stuff, but he said something that it's funny, you find it's like, I think wisdom is like a collection of insights from a very wide varied group of sources. But he said that he found enlightenment as a child. He was one of these kids that just had like a instant enlightenment, just never the same ever again. And he just stared at his desk in school in India and just looked at his desk, and he's like, well, it's a desk. And I know it's a desk, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know how it got here. And he just got stuck for years of just being, they pulled him out of school. Like he just ceased to function in the normal way because he just had this epiphany of like, I don't know what anything is.
Yeah.
And that was enough for this guy to, I guess achieve this enlightened state. And then he slowly come out of that and then went to practiced Buddhism and things like that. But the fact of just saying I don't know and like genuinely understanding in the deepest part of whatever you are to understand that you actually don't know anything is enough to enlighten a person.
Yeah, and that moves on to existentialism and all sorts of things like that as well, right? But I mean, even the idea of not knowing and the perspective you have on what you think you know and what you don't know. I'll use an example. For the majority of human existence, we only knew about the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun. Then we started with Galileo. We ended up understanding that the stars that were moving in certain different orbits that people thought were celestial bodies or whatever you wanted to call them were actually planets and were part of a solar system. And so that was the breadth of what we thought existence was. And then we understood that we're actually in a galaxy with loads of stars, which all those different stars have got planets. Well, a lot of them have got planets around them as well, potentially like our Earth. But it wasn't until who was it? I think it was Hubble. It was Hubble. Ended up realizing that actually one of those stars that looked like a star, actually when you look closer, was actually another galaxy. That was the first time. I think it was the Andromeda galaxy, which is our closest one, which is about twice the size of ours, about 400 billion stars. And he was like, holy shit, that's another galaxy. So that completely then changed our perspective.
Could you imagine being that dude?
And then you were like, we thought the whole universe, everything existing in the universe was the 200 billion stars in our galaxy. At that time, we didn't even know it was that many. We thought it was a lot less, but for this discussion, let's say it's that. And then realized that actually our galaxy, which we thought was the only one in the universe, is now one of trillions of galaxies in the universe. Each one of those galaxies has between 50 billion and sort of 500 billion stars. That massive shift in the importance of the human race. Unfortunately, it's a downward scale of importance, not an upward one. But when you understand your perspective in the universe, dramatically shifting like that, it also makes you then think, like we were talking about earlier, we now understand the scale of everything else in our cosmic realm to a much higher degree than we ever have. We now understood our insignificance, not just our insignificance as a planet, but if our planet's insignificant, our race is pretty insignificant, and you and I are definitely insignificant.
And then the differences between races are even further insignificant.
And so again, if you start understanding science and start getting this, it gives you a different perspective on an outlook on everything, and it makes you genuinely understand how petty all the shit is that we get angry about every single day. And it gives you much more clarity on what's genuinely important, because you stop caring about Donald Trump or Joe Biden. You stop caring about COVID ruining a year of your life, because that you'll get through it. But even that, it's on a cosmic scale, it's completely insignificant. And so when you talk about things like I was saying with hope and stuff, being able to try and push the human species further into that cosmic scale, so that we're not as insignificant, so that there is more significance and more integration with the scale of the universe. Even that's just from observation, even if it's not talking about moving to other planets and all that sort of thing, even if it's just focused on understanding our position more, understanding the creation of the universe, understanding what happens at the end of the universe. Are we in a multiverse with loads of different universes all in a big foam of bubbles, which is a hot topic at the moment? Are we in a simulation? I don't know what the answers are. I'm not saying I do, but
I was going to say that's probably the point, and I think that this is the point where like the guru thing gets fucked up, and then the science thing gets fucked up, and then like there's what's this? There's one guy at the moment that's around. He's doing the podcast tour talking about how basically reality is only a construct of consciousness, and he will just defend it so vehemently, and it's just like, okay, so when you get operated on and you go unconscious, what's that? Does the surgeon that's cutting into your heart and putting in an artificial valve and then wakes you up from being unconscious, and now you have it, like, where did reality go for that to? But there's people out there that they make these claims about like the fundamental nature of reality or the fundamental nature of consciousness. Like, I think that's what maybe deters people in a sense, is because if you are interested and if you do want to follow it to what we understand, then you're just going to find these fucking rogue weirdos that want to make all these claims, you know what I mean?
You always have opportunists who say bullshit or use science against it, and that's where pseudoscience comes from, right? People pretending that there's
like meditation's the same thing. Like, there's all these fucking kooks out there that do that, that carry on about all these claims about the nature of everything. It's like, I think at some point you've just got to go, cool, this is genuinely what we do understand. And I was just going to say, like, a follow up to that then is, it seems like you've found a certain level of comfort in that, and it does give you a perspective that then lets you live a normal life, or like you kind of live from that place of perspective, and that sort of grounds you in a way,
I don't know, maybe in a certain degree, but I'm just curious, so I naturally just enjoy learning, and I wish I had this sort of curiosity that I have today when I was younger, because I was a straight A student in school, but I probably would have taken a different course in my education and focused a lot more on things like science instead of things like history and English and languages and so on, like I did. But I just think that having the more information you have, the better a person you should be. And I've got a pretty simple motto that I heard from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a big professor who did the Cosmos series recently on Fox, I think it was. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing to a certain degree, but he says, there's a really simple way that you can actually live a pretty good life. Every single day, learn something new that you didn't learn yesterday, as number one. And number two, don't be a cunt. And actually, it sounds really simple, but actually if you live your life like that, it's surprised how far you can get. Because every single time you learn something new, it makes you a better person, or at least it makes you a more informed person. And it's just probably a good thing not to be a cunt, isn't it?
I should try it sometime.
I'm really bad at number two, but
I've got to learn something every day, I feel like, but being a cunt, fucking hell. No, I think
it's the first time I've said that on a podcast as well, so that's a nice little win for today.
I say it a lot on here.
How much time have you got?
I don't know, what time is it?
What time? How long have we been going for?
Time's at dinner house. 5:23. Oh, we got dinner soon, don't we? Huh? So we've got another sort of 10-15 minutes. I thought it'd be quite good to finish the podcast on the word cunt. That would have been sweet. No,
we
I'm just
can
joking.
finish.
No, I'm joking. No.
Finish on the word cunt.
No, we can do. Yeah, let's get Sam to come on and finish off with just that word.
How do you get involved with Sammy first? Was it through Rockstar?
Yeah, it was Rockstar. So it was just after my dad died, and it was the first event that I went to, essentially as the owner of the race team, with my long blonde DJ hair, my eyebrow piercing, and my t-shirt unbuttoned, or my shirt unbuttoned to my stomach, and looking like a bit of a twat. And then Sammy was there, and he was the only guy that looked equally as stupid as I did. So we bonded.
And we thought, geez, we could be mad.
Did we just become
best friends?
Oh, that's fucking.
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean,
Literally.
yeah, and who else was in there? Adam Bailey was there as well. Adam Bailey was hanging around back in those days as well. Bailey's been on this podcast, hasn't he? Yeah,
a couple of times now.
A couple of times.
Yeah, he's a fucking legend.
He's a good dude. And so, we just sort of hung out ever since, haven't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Somehow still putting up with each other.
What's your movements from
now? And
what the fuck are you gonna be, bro?
I don't know, dude. I've been in Victoria in lockdown for a long time. So Hayley and I did the hotel quarantine to get out of Victoria so we could go to the race at Bathurst.
Yeah.
We then did the 2 weeks in Byron for sort of isolation in Byron Bay, which wasn't really isolation. It was just one party for 2 weeks. It was pretty
mint.
Yeah, it was fun. And then we thought we'd come up here for a month and just sort of stay here whilst everything sort of ironed itself out in Victoria. So I'll probably leave in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And head back. And then who knows? I mean, international travel is, as we just spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, that's pretty much on a hiatus until God knows how long, but probably until 2022, unless you have a vaccine. So I'll be putting my hand up pretty quick to get that so I can travel again. But fundamentally, I'm stuck here at the moment because if I leave, I can't come back.
Yeah.
And at some point my visa will have to go, and and
are you on so you're not?
I'm on visas.
Citizen?
No, I'm on visas. So
fuck that. What a nightmare.
Yeah, so it's not been easy, but so far, to be honest, they've been pretty good.
Yeah.
But at some point, you just can't keep getting your visas renewed because at some point, it's all going to change. But fortunately, they've been making good exemptions for people like me who've been sort of stuck here, and I think they've used the phrase COVID refugee, which sounds
that's pretty sick.
sounds pretty
sounds quite depressing, really.
Yeah, it does. I'm a COVID refugee.
Poor Ryan Walkinshaw. I feel so terrible for him.
Yeah, no, so do I.
Can we start a GoFundMe or something like through the podcast?
Yeah, Ryan's charity. But at some point I want to go back because I want to see my cat. I want to go and see my friends.
What's your normal split of time?
6 months in Australia, roughly sort of 5-6 months, and then sort of normally 3 months traveling in Japan and India and USA or wherever else I need to go for work, and then sort of 3 months sort of back home.
Yeah.
But it changes every year. Like 1 year I did like something ridiculous. How many flights did I do in 1 year? Like 120 flights in a year or something stupid like that. So sometimes I'm just in the air the whole time and travel around loads. But on a normal sort of year, I travel sort of 50 to 70 flights, which is still quite a lot.
Yeah.
I know my carbon footprint's pretty horrific for
size 12.
Yeah, size 12. Yeah.
It's funny what you said about using the international travel just to chill. Like I remember, I think in the time that I lived in the US, I probably did that flight like 26 or 28 times, I think it was.
Yeah.
And man, everyone used to be like, "Oh, how you feeling about that flight?" And I'm like,
I look forward to it.
I cannot tell you how excited I am to get the fuck away from all of you, my phone, and then get the fuck away from all of them that I'm going to. This is going to be an absolute treat.
Yeah.
But yeah, that did go away with the Wi-Fi thing.
Yeah, it does. But hopefully by sort of Q1 or Q2 next year, vaccines will be out and we'll be able to travel again, and they'll start ramping that up. Because it'd be quite good to be able to get back home at some point. We've been here for a long time. My mum was actually with us for a long time as well. and she left just as lockdown happened, and the proper full lockdown happened in Melbourne. So the sort of stage 3, and then going to stage 4. Because back then it was summer in Europe and COVID was basically gone everywhere, and everyone was, all blasé and happy about it. And then, poor her, she was there for 3 months, and now she's in sort of stage 3 lockdown in the UK. So she managed to dodge one, but she couldn't dodge the second one, unfortunately. But it'd be good to go back to Melbourne soon.
Well, I have really enjoyed talking to someone that is way smarter than me. It happens quite a lot, but I really enjoyed it, and I just figured if we didn't have the full time, probably not gonna. We'll go into your backstory the second time you come on.
Yeah, I'll come back again.
It's a very interesting story, and super stoked. We've actually never met too.
Yeah,
which people might not. Well, obviously people wouldn't know, but Maddie, my brother, knows you super well. Sammy knows you super well. Everyone tells me how much of a fucking lord you are. Finally got the chance to meet you, and stoked nice. We got to have a chat.
Yeah, same here, dude. Thank you very much for having me on board, and cheers for Sammy for getting me on here when I was trying to find all sorts of ways to not. No, I was just because I've been here for a little while, and I've got when you're sort of here for a couple of weeks and you sort of put off seeing everyone for ages, and then it comes to your last 5 days, and all of a sudden fuck, I've not seen anyone that I actually meant to go and see. So we've just been smashing it. Haley, every 5 minutes, Haley's like, you got this to do, you got to go and have lunch with this person, you got to go and see this person for a meeting, you got to go and have dinner with these guys tonight. So I was like, oh shit, and Sammy's like, you got to go on the podcast. I was like, I really want to come on the podcast, but I'm getting more and more fully booked. It's going to be crazy to get the time in. So I'm glad we managed to get it done though. It's been cool.
Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate.
No worries. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. And to listen to the full 3-hour podcast, search Gypsy Tales in your favorite podcast platform or click the link in the description below. Gypsy Gang.